The December air was crisp and filled with anticipation as Westminster Abbey prepared for one of its most cherished annual traditions. Inside the ancient walls, florists worked tirelessly to arrange towering displays of holly, ivy, and white roses, their fragrance mixing with the scent of centuries-old stone and polished wood. The Gothic arches seemed to hum with excitement as staff members made final preparations for the evening's carol service. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, stood in her private quarters at Kensington Palace, carefully considering her wardrobe choices for the evening. The burgundy coat hanging in her closet caught her eye, elegant yet approachable, formal yet warm. She had learned over the years that every detail mattered at these public events, not just for the photographers who would capture every moment, but for the families who would attend. Tonight was about them, about bringing comfort and joy during the Christmas season to those who needed it most. Across London, families who had been personally invited by the princess began their own preparations. Sarah Matthews smoothed down her daughter's best dress while fighting back tears. Just 6 months ago, she never imagined they would be sitting in Westminster Abbey, guests of the royal family. The letter had arrived 3 weeks earlier, beautifully written on cream paper, inviting them to attend the carol service as recognition of their community work during the pandemic. Sarah's small organization had delivered groceries to elderly neighbors for 2 years, never expecting any acknowledgement beyond grateful smiles. Meanwhile, at Windsor Castle, other members of the royal family were making their own preparations. The king had insisted on attending despite his busy schedule, understanding the importance of supporting his daughter-in-law's initiative. He adjusted his tie in the mirror, remembering his own mother's dedication to such events. Queen Elizabeth had taught them all that these moments of connection with the public were not just duties, but privileges that came with their positions. The guest list for tonight's service read like a testament to human kindness. Teachers who had gone above and beyond during school closures, healthcare workers who had worked endless shifts, volunteers who had organized food banks, and community leaders who had brought neighbors together during isolation. Each invitation had been carefully considered, each story personally reviewed by Catherine herself. As the afternoon light began to fade, the Abbey's bells started their gentle chiming, calling London's attention to the approaching evening. Tour guides finished their final groups of the day, and the massive doors were sealed to begin the transformation. Chairs were arranged in perfect rows, each position marked with small cards bearing guests' names. The lighting crew tested their equipment, ensuring the ancient building would glow with warm, welcoming light for the television cameras and, more importantly, for the families who would soon fill these sacred spaces. Catherine's lady-in-waiting arrived to discuss the evening's schedule. There would be a receiving line, brief conversations with select guests, the service itself, and then a reception in the adjacent hall. Each element had been planned not for grandeur, but for genuine connection. Catherine had requested extra time between formal elements, wanting opportunities for real conversations rather than hurried pleasantries. The princess's 3 children had been practicing their carols for weeks. Charlotte had perfected her solo verse of Once in Royal David's City, while George and Louis had mastered their harmony parts. Tonight would mark their first major public appearance at such an event, and Catherine felt a mixture of pride and protectiveness as she thought about them participating in this family tradition. Security teams conducted their final sweeps, while television crews set up their equipment with military precision. The BBC had been granted primary coverage rights, with strict instructions to focus on the service's meaning rather than creating a spectacle. Additional cameras positioned throughout the Abbey would capture the genuine reactions of families experiencing this once-in-a-lifetime moment. As 6 o'clock approached, the first cars began arriving at the Abbey's entrance. Guests stepped out onto the red carpet, many clutching invitations as if they were precious treasures. Their faces showed a mixture of excitement and disbelief, ordinary people about to share an extraordinary evening with the royal family. Each arrival was greeted by palace staff members who had been briefed on their individual stories, ensuring that every guest felt recognized and valued from the moment they entered. The Abbey's organist began running through warm-up scales, the magnificent pipe organ filling the space with rich, resonant tones. Soon, those same pipes would accompany voices raised in celebration, creating a musical tapestry that would weave together royal tradition and community spirit. Tonight, Westminster Abbey would once again fulfill its role as a place where the nation comes together, where differences in background fade away in the presence of shared humanity and hope. The royal convoy moved through London's evening traffic with quiet dignity, no fanfare or sirens announcing their approach. Catherine gazed out of the car window at the city's Christmas lights, reflecting off wet pavements. Her thoughts focused on the people waiting inside Westminster Abbey. She had spent months planning tonight's event, personally reviewing every aspect to ensure it would feel more like a community gathering than a formal royal occasion. Prince William sat beside her, occasionally glancing at his phone where messages from well-wishers and family members continued to arrive. Their children chattered excitedly in the seats behind them, George pointing out familiar landmarks while Charlotte practiced her carol verses under her breath. Louis pressed his face against the window, fascinated by the decorated shop fronts they passed along the route. Inside Westminster Abbey, guests were beginning to settle into their seats, many still overwhelmed by their surroundings. Maria Gonzalez, who had organized a neighborhood food bank from her small flat in South London, found herself seated in the third row, close enough to see the ornate details carved into the choir stalls centuries ago. She thought about the families she had helped feed over the past 2 years, wondering if they would believe her when she told them about tonight. Dr. James Patterson, who had worked in a COVID-19 intensive care unit throughout the pandemic, sat with his wife and teenage daughter. His hands, which had saved countless lives, trembled slightly as he opened the service program. The invitation had arrived during one of his darkest weeks, when the weight of loss had nearly broken his spirit. Tonight felt like a gentle reminder that his sacrifices had not gone unnoticed. The Abbey's choir director gathered his singers for final instructions, their white surplices pristine against the warm stone backdrop. These were some of Britain's finest voices, but tonight they would share the stage with children from local schools and community choirs. The mixing of professional and amateur voices had been Catherine's specific request. She wanted the music to reflect the diversity of the congregation. As the royal family's cars approached the Abbey's entrance, photographers positioned themselves behind barriers, their cameras ready to capture the arrival. But this evening, the focus would shift quickly from fashion and protocol to substance and connection. Catherine had personally requested that media coverage emphasize the stories of the invited guests, rather than dwelling on royal glamour. The Prince and Princess of Wales stepped out of their vehicle, Catherine's burgundy coat catching the warm light from the Abbey's entrance. She paused to wave to the small crowd that had gathered despite the cold, her smile genuine and relaxed. William followed, stopping to shake hands with a veteran who had been waiting behind barriers for hours. Their children emerged next, George offering a shy wave while Charlotte and Louis stayed close to their parents. Inside, the Abbey fell silent as word spread that the royal family had arrived. Guests turned in their seats, craning their necks for a glimpse, but the anticipation was mixed with nervousness. Many had never been in such close proximity to royalty, and protocol questions buzzed through their minds. Should they stand? Bow? Curtsy? Palace staff members moved through the congregation with quiet reassurance, reminding everyone that tonight was about celebration, not ceremony. The receiving line formed in the Abbey's nave, allowing Catherine and William to greet selected guests personally. Each conversation had been carefully planned, with the princess briefed on individual stories and achievements. When she reached Thomas Chen, who had taught online classes to disadvantaged children throughout lockdowns, she spoke knowledgeably about his school's innovative programs and the challenges he had overcome. Catherine's interactions revealed her genuine interest in people's stories. With elderly volunteer Grace Henderson, who had sewn hundreds of masks for healthcare workers, the princess spent several minutes discussing patterns and techniques. Her questions were specific and informed, showing that the invitations had not been issued carelessly but with real understanding of each person's contributions. The children's choir from a local primary school performed their opening number, voices clear and sweet in the Abbey's acoustics. Several of these young singers came from families that had been supported by the very volunteers now sitting in the congregation. The circular nature of community support was evident as helpers and helped sat side by side, united by their shared humanity. As the formal service began, the Archbishop of Canterbury took his position, but his remarks would be brief. Catherine had specifically requested that the evening focus on music and reflection rather than lengthy sermons. She understood that many guests might feel intimidated by religious formality, so the service had been designed to feel inclusive and welcoming to people of all backgrounds. The first carol began with a single voice, Charlotte's clear soprano floating through the abbey as she sang the opening verse of Once in Royal David's City. The traditional solo, usually performed by a choir boy, had been given to the young princess as both an honor and a responsibility. Her voice carried no trace of nervousness, as centuries of royal tradition and contemporary community spirit merged in perfect harmony. Behind the scenes, palace staff monitored every detail, ensuring that elderly guests were comfortable and that families with young children had everything they needed. The evening's success would be measured not by media coverage or protocol perfection, but by the genuine joy and connection visible on guests' faces. This was Catherine's vision made reality. A royal tradition transformed into a celebration of ordinary, extraordinary people. The abbey resonated with the pure sound of Charlotte's voice as she completed her solo, the ancient stones seeming to hold and amplify each note before releasing them into the vaulted ceiling. As the choir joined in for the full verse, Catherine felt a swell of maternal pride mixed with deeper emotion. This moment represented everything she had hoped to achieve. Tradition serving community, privilege, creating opportunity for recognition and celebration. In the congregation, handkerchiefs appeared as tears flowed freely. Janet Morrison, who had organized grocery deliveries for isolated seniors throughout the pandemic, found herself crying not from sadness, but from overwhelming gratitude. 6 months ago, she had been struggling with her own grief after losing her husband, yet she had continued helping others. Tonight, sitting in Westminster Abbey listening to a future queen sing, she felt seen and valued in ways she had never imagined possible. The service continued with readings from guests themselves, a departure from traditional royal events where only clergy or dignitaries participated. Marcus Williams, a youth worker from Birmingham, who had kept teenagers engaged through online programs during lockdowns, approached the lectern with careful steps. His voice shook slightly as he read from the Gospel of Luke, but his words carried the authenticity of someone who had lived the meaning behind them. Prince George and Prince Louis flanked their father in the front row, their behavior impeccable despite their young age. William occasionally whispered gentle reminders about posture or attention, but mostly he watched with pride as his children participated in their first major public service. Their presence added a family dimension to the evening that resonated with the many parents in attendance who had juggled their own responsibilities while serving their communities. The Abbey's magnificent organ accompanied a performance by the London Community Gospel Choir, their voices bringing contemporary energy to traditional hymns. Many congregation members swayed slightly in their seats, caught up in the infectious joy of the music. This was Catherine's vision realized, a service that honored royal tradition while embracing the diverse voices that made up modern Britain. Between musical selections, the Archbishop shared brief stories about some of the evening's guests, though names were kept confidential to preserve privacy. He spoke of the teacher who had cycled miles daily to deliver printed lessons to students without internet access, of the grandmother who had organized neighborhood support networks from her phone, of the teenager who had started a mental health support group for his peers. Each story drew gentle applause and knowing nods from the congregation. Catherine rose to deliver the evening's main address, her words carefully chosen to acknowledge both the challenges of recent years and the extraordinary responses they had inspired. She spoke without notes, her voice carrying across the abbey with warmth and sincerity. Her message was simple but profound: that service to others, regardless of scale or recognition, represented the highest form of royal behavior, and that tonight's guests were all nobility in the truest sense. Her speech included specific examples that resonated deeply with those present. She mentioned the woman who had taught elderly neighbors to use video calls to connect with family, the man who had organized socially distanced birthday celebrations for children, the couple who had fostered teenagers when traditional placements became impossible. Each reference prompted quiet gasps of recognition from guests who realized their stories had reached the princess personally. As Catherine spoke, camera operators captured not just her words but the faces in the congregation, expressions of surprise, joy, and validation that would tell the real story of this evening. These were not professional actors or practiced public speakers, but ordinary people whose extraordinary actions had earned them a place in this extraordinary setting. The children's participation continued, As Prince Louis joined a group of young guests in lighting Advent candles, their small hands carefully guided by clergy members. The symbolism was powerful. The next generation learning that privilege came with responsibility, that tradition meant service, that leadership required humility. Catherine and William exchanged glances, knowing their children were learning lessons that no classroom could provide. The musical program reached its crescendo with a performance of "O Come, All Ye Faithful" that included every voice in the abbey. Professional singers blended with nervous volunteers, creating a sound that was imperfect but utterly genuine. The acoustics of Westminster Abbey made everyone sound magnificent. And for those few minutes, social hierarchies dissolved completely in shared celebration. During the collection, instead of monetary donations, guests were invited to write messages of hope and commitment for the coming year. Small cards had been placed in each seat, and throughout the service, people had been quietly writing personal pledges to continue serving their communities. These cards would later be compiled into a book that Catherine would reference throughout the year as she planned future community engagement initiatives. The service's final musical selection featured a newly commissioned piece that incorporated melodies from various cultural traditions represented in the congregation. The composer had spent weeks interviewing guests about their heritage and incorporating musical elements that reflected Britain's diversity. As the complex harmonies filled the abbey, many guests heard echoes of their own cultural backgrounds woven into this most British of institutions. As the formal service concluded, guests remained seated for a moment of silence, processing what they had experienced. The weight of tradition, the beauty of the music, the sincerity of recognition, and the unexpected intimacy of the evening combined to create something none of them would ever forget. This was royal magic at its finest. Not about pageantry or display, but about human connection and shared purpose. The reception hall, adjacent to Westminster Abbey, had been transformed into a warm, welcoming space where royal protocol gave way to genuine conversation. Round tables replaced formal receiving lines, and the atmosphere deliberately echoed a community center gathering rather than a palace function. Catherine had specifically requested this informal approach, understanding that many guests might feel intimidated by traditional royal reception formats. As guests filed into the reception area, they found themselves mingling naturally with members of the royal family. Prince William engaged in animated conversation with a group of teachers about the challenges of remote learning, while Catherine sat with several healthcare workers, listening intently to their experiences during the pandemic's darkest days. The couple had prepared for these conversations by reading detailed briefings about each guest's story, but their interest was genuinely personal rather than merely diplomatic. 8-year-old Emma Thompson, daughter of a single mother who had organized neighborhood childcare cooperatives, found herself in conversation with Prince George about their shared interest in football. Their discussion about favorite teams and players proceeded with the easy naturalness of children, while nearby adults watched with amazement at the completely unguarded interaction between future king and ordinary child. The evening's refreshments reflected Catherine's attention to inclusive details. Instead of elaborate canapés that might intimidate guests unfamiliar with formal dining, the menu featured comfort foods from various cultural traditions represented in the congregation. Samosas shared space with sandwiches, while traditional Christmas pudding sat alongside baklava and plantain chips. Each dish told a story about modern British diversity. Dr. Amara Okafor, who had led a mobile vaccination unit through underserved communities, found herself discussing public health challenges with both Catherine and William. Their questions demonstrated genuine understanding of healthcare inequalities and community outreach challenges. What struck her most was their ability to listen without offering quick solutions or empty platitudes. They simply absorbed information that would inform future Royal Foundation work. The children from the evening's choir circulated among guests, still wearing their white robes but now relaxed and excited about their performance. Many had never imagined they would sing in Westminster Abbey, let alone meet princes and princesses. Their joy was infectious, and soon adults were kneeling to their level, sharing in animated conversations about school, hobbies, and Christmas wishes. Catherine made a point of spending time with each family group, but her interactions felt natural rather than ceremonial. With the Rodriguez family, who had organized community kitchens during lockdowns, she discussed recipes and cooking techniques with genuine interest. Her questions about adapting meals for large groups and managing food distribution logistics revealed practical knowledge that impressed the experienced volunteers. Behind the scenes, palace staff monitored the evening's flow while remaining nearly invisible. Their job was to ensure guests felt comfortable and that conversations could develop naturally without the pressure of time constraints or protocol requirements. Several staff members had worked with Catherine for years and understood her vision of accessible royalty that connected authentically with the public. The gift exchange that concluded the reception reflected the evening's spirit of mutual appreciation. Instead of traditional royal gifts, guests received small tokens made by artisans from communities similar to their own. Hand-knitted scarves from women's cooperatives, wooden ornaments carved by refugee craftsmen, bookmarks created by children in literacy programs. Each gift carried stories of resilience and creativity that mirrored the recipient's own experiences. Prince Louis charmed elderly guests by asking them about their grandchildren and sharing stories about his own family traditions. His natural curiosity and complete lack of self-consciousness created magical moments as he listened seriously to accounts of wartime Christmases and community celebrations from decades past. These intergenerational connections embodied the evening's theme of community continuity and shared values. The photography throughout the reception captured genuine moments rather than posed portraits. Images showed William helping an elderly volunteer to her seat, Charlotte teaching younger children the hand movements to a carol, Catherine laughing at a story shared by community organizers. These photographs would later become treasured mementos for guests, while also documenting the authentic nature of the evening's interactions. As conversations flowed, spontaneous moments of recognition occurred between guests who discovered unexpected connections. The teacher who had delivered meals to elderly neighbors found herself talking with one of the recipients she had helped. The youth worker who had organized virtual graduation ceremonies met parents whose children had participated. These chance encounters reinforced the interconnected nature of community service and the ripple effects of individual kindness. The evening's technology component reflected modern sensibilities while honoring traditional values. Guests were invited to record brief video messages about their community work, which would be compiled into a digital archive celebrating unsung heroes across Britain. This initiative, suggested by Catherine herself, would provide ongoing inspiration and recognition beyond the single evening celebration. Musical performances continued throughout the reception, but in intimate settings rather than formal presentations. Small groups gathered around the piano as guests shared songs from their own cultural traditions, creating an impromptu festival of community music. The Abbey's acoustics made even amateur performances sound magnificent, encouraging shy participants to share their talents. As the evening progressed, the initial nervousness visible on many faces gave way to relaxed enjoyment and genuine connection. Guests who had arrived feeling honored but overwhelmed were now engaged in meaningful conversations about shared experiences and future collaborations. Catherine's vision of creating lasting connections rather than ceremonial encounters was clearly succeeding. As the evening drew toward its close, the atmosphere in Westminster Abbey's reception hall had transformed completely from the formal reverence of the service to something resembling a beloved family gathering. Laughter echoed off ancient walls as guests who had arrived as strangers discovered shared experiences and forged new friendships. Catherine moved through the room with quiet satisfaction, observing conversations that would continue long after tonight ended. The moment that would become the evening's most talked-about occurrence happened spontaneously when 10-year-old Aisha Patel, whose mother had organized community gardens in tower block courtyards, shyly approached Princess Charlotte with a small wrapped package. Inside was a friendship bracelet she had woven herself, featuring the colors of both the British flag and her family's Indian heritage. Charlotte immediately put it on and asked Aisha to teach her the weaving technique, leading to an impromptu crafting lesson that drew curious observers from across the room. Prince William found himself in deep conversation with Robert MacLeod, a former soldier who had created a support network for veterans struggling with isolation. Their discussion about military experiences and community responsibility revealed common ground that transcended their different backgrounds. William's own military service provided authentic context for understanding the challenges Robert had addressed through his volunteer work, creating a connection that felt natural rather than contrived. The evening's final musical moment came when Catherine requested a simple rendition of Silent Night, with all voices joining together. Unlike the formal choral arrangements earlier, this performance was unpolished and heartfelt, with some voices strong and others tentative, but all unified in shared purpose. The Abbey's acoustics wrapped around the imperfect harmony, creating something beautiful precisely because of its human authenticity. As families began to collect coats and prepare for departure, many lingered in doorways, reluctant to end an experience they knew would never be repeated. The royal children said their goodbyes with genuine warmth, George shaking hands solemnly while Charlotte and Louis offered enthusiastic hugs to their new friends. These natural interactions between royal and non-royal children demonstrated the evening's core message about the fundamental equality of human worth. Catherine personally thanked each departing family, but her words went beyond polite formality to specific acknowledgement of individual contributions. She reminded Mrs. Patterson about the reading program she had mentioned and promised to send information about similar initiatives. She asked Mr. Chen to keep her updated about his school's technology needs and suggested connections with Royal Foundation resources. These weren't empty promises, but genuine commitments that would be followed up by palace staff. The logistics of departure had been carefully planned to maintain dignity while avoiding overwhelming security requirements. Guests left in small groups, each family escorted to waiting cars that would return them to their neighborhoods across London. Many clutched programs, photographs, and small gifts as tangible proof of an evening that might otherwise seem like a dream when they woke tomorrow morning. Dr. Sarah Williams, who had coordinated mental health support for frontline workers, found herself reflecting on the evening's emotional impact as her car pulled away from Westminster Abbey. The recognition she had received felt meaningful not just personally but as validation for all the colleagues who had worked alongside her during impossible circumstances. Tonight had honored not just individuals but entire communities of unsung heroes. Back inside the Abbey, Catherine and William gathered their own children for the journey home, but the conversations continued as George, Charlotte, and Louis shared their favorite moments from the evening. Charlotte was particularly excited about her new friendship with Aisha and was already planning ways to stay in touch. These childhood connections formed tonight would likely influence their understanding of royal responsibility for years to come. The media coverage that followed would focus not on fashion choices or royal glamour, but on the genuine connections forged between the royal family and their guests. Photographers had captured moments of authentic interaction that no amount of staging could have created. William's surprised laughter at a veteran's joke, Catherine's concentrated attention during conversations about community challenges, the children's unself-conscious joy in making new friends. Palace staff began the complex process of follow-up that Catherine had mandated as essential to the evening's success. Contact information would be preserved, connections facilitated, and promises kept. The princess had learned from previous events that the real impact came not from single spectacular moments but from sustained engagement that honored the relationships formed during these special occasions. In homes across London, families who had attended the service began calling relatives and friends to share their experiences. Many struggled to find words adequate to describe the evening's emotional impact, but all emphasized the warmth and genuineness of their royal encounters. Social media filled with carefully chosen photographs and grateful messages that would extend the evening's positive influence far beyond Westminster Abbey's walls. The service had achieved Catherine's ambitious goals of honoring community heroes while demonstrating royal accessibility and relevance. More importantly, it had created a template for future events that prioritized human connection over ceremonial display. The evening proved that royal tradition could evolve to serve contemporary needs while maintaining its essential dignity and meaning. As London settled into quiet winter darkness, Westminster Abbey stood empty but somehow still resonating with the voices and stories that had filled its spaces. The ancient building had witnessed another chapter in its long history of bringing people together across social boundaries, proving once again that some traditions endure because they serve eternal human needs for recognition, connection, and hope. Tonight's carol service would be remembered not just as a royal event but as a celebration of the extraordinary capacity for goodness that exists within ordinary people, waiting only for recognition and encouragement to flourish.